The room went silent the moment my hand touched hers. Not a polite silence. Not the kind you get when a joke falls flat at a dinner table. This was the silence of 300 beings holding their breath at once, glasses frozen halfway to open mouths, feathered ears folding back, tentacled fingers curling into fists. Somewhere behind me, a tray of drinks hit the floor and shattered, and even that sound seemed to apologize for existing. I did not understand any of it. Not yet. My name is Callum Ashby, and 3 minutes earlier, I had been standing against a wall made of something that looked like frozen smoke, holding a drink I was too nervous to taste, wondering how a junior human attaché had ended up at a state gala on a space station, orbiting a star I couldn't pronounce. I was not important. I want to make that clear from the start. I was the 4th-ranked member of a 6-person human delegation, and my only real job that night was to stand near the ambassador, nod when she nodded, and not embarrass an entire species. I was about to fail spectacularly at that last part. The gala was being held to celebrate a new trade agreement between Earth and a coalition of older, stranger worlds who had been trading with each other since before humans figured out how to make fire reliably. Everyone in that ballroom had been alive, in some form, for longer than human civilization had existed. I had read the briefing packet on the shuttle ride over. I want to say that in my defense, I had read it. I simply had not absorbed a single word of it, because the shuttle ride was 6 hours long, and I had spent most of it staring out the window at stars that didn't have names yet, at least not names I knew. So when I saw her standing alone at the edge of the dance floor, I did what any reasonably polite human does when they see someone standing alone at a party. I walked over. She was tall, taller than me by a full head, with skin the color of deep water under moonlight, and eyes that seemed to hold a second, dimmer light behind the first one. She wore a gown that moved like it was made of dark liquid, and she stood completely still, watching the dancing crowd the way a person watches rain fall against a window, present, but somehow separate from it. Everyone else in the room was giving her a wide circle. I noticed that. I want to be honest, I did notice it. I simply read it wrong. I thought she was shy. I thought, here is someone standing alone at a party where everyone else is too nervous to talk to her, and I know exactly what that feels like, because I had been standing alone against a wall of frozen smoke for the better part of an hour. So I walked up, and I said the only thing that made sense to me in that moment. Would you like to dance? I did not bow. I did not use any of the 17 approved greeting phrases from the briefing packet. I just asked, the way you'd ask a stranger at a wedding reception, casual and a little hopeful, prepared for a polite no. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour. In reality, it was probably 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time when 300 people have stopped breathing. Then she smiled. It was a small smile, but it changed her whole face, the way sunrise changes a landscape without moving a single rock. She tilted her head, studying me the way you'd study a puzzle piece that didn't belong to the puzzle you were building, but fit anyway. You do not know who I am, she said. Her voice was low and clear, with an accent that curled around the edges of each word like smoke around a flame. No, I admitted. Should I? Somewhere behind me, I heard someone make a sound like they were choking on their own tongue. I did not turn around. I was too focused on her eyes, on that second dim light behind the first, waiting for her answer. Everyone else here does, she said. Well, I said, I'm new. And then, to the horror of everyone watching, she laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her, like she hadn't planned on making that sound, and wasn't entirely sure what to do now that she had. Yes, she said. You are. Very new. She held out her hand. I accept. I took her hand, and the room exhaled all at once, 300 beings letting out a breath they'd been holding since I first crossed the floor, and somewhere in that collective exhale, I thought I heard someone whisper a word I didn't recognize, something that sounded like a title, heavy and formal, but I was too busy trying to remember how to dance to a rhythm with 7 beats instead of 4 to pay it much attention. Her name, she told me as we began to move, was Iskariel. She did not offer a last name, and I did not ask for one, because on Earth, we don't always assume everyone has one, and it didn't occur to me that the absence of it meant something entirely different here. You dance strangely, she said, after my third attempt to find the beat. I dance badly, I corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Strange implies intentional. Bad implies I'm doing my best and failing. She considered this with the seriousness of someone weighing a philosophical argument. I think I prefer strange, she said. Bad is common. Strange is rare. We moved through the crowd, and I noticed, even then, distracted as I was, that the crowd moved around us in a way that felt deliberate, a wide ring of empty space following us across the floor, like we were the eye of a very quiet storm. I assumed it was courtesy. I assumed people were giving the two of us room to dance badly without an audience too close. I was wrong about that too, but I wouldn't learn how wrong for a little while yet. Tell me about your world, Iskariel said. The new one, the loud one. Loud? Your species arrived, speaking before you understood what silence meant here. It was noticed. I laughed, because it was true, and because there was something comfortable in the way she said it. No judgment in her voice, just observation, the way you'd describe weather. We're working on it, I said. The listening part. We're better at the talking part. I have noticed, she said, and there was that small smile again. You did not perform the greeting protocol. My stomach dropped a little. Was I supposed to? 17 phrases. Most delegates memorize at least 3, out of caution. I read the packet, I said. On the shuttle. I promise I read it. And yet the stars were very distracting. She laughed again, and this time it lasted longer, long enough that a few heads in the crowd turned toward the sound, surprised, like they'd heard something they didn't expect to hear again for a long time. I didn't understand that reaction either. I filed it away as a strange, curious moment, in a night that was already full of them. We danced for a while without speaking, and I found the rhythm eventually, the 7 beats settling into something my body could follow if I stopped thinking about it and let her lead, which she did, gently, without ever making it feel like a correction. Can I ask you something? I said. You may. What do you do? For work, I mean. On your world, or here, or wherever it is you're from. Something shifted behind her eyes, that second dim light flickering, and for a moment, I thought I'd asked the wrong question, the way you sometimes do at parties without meaning to. I make judgments, she said finally. Like a critic? Not quite. A teacher? Not quite that either. You're being deliberately mysterious, I said, and I want you to know I find that very charming and also slightly annoying. She smiled at that, wider than before. I decide who continues and who does not, she said. In matters that require deciding, it is old work, necessary work, not always gentle work. I nodded like I understood, though I didn't, not really. I thought she meant something like a judge, someone who settled disputes over trade routes or property lines, the kind of quiet bureaucratic work that keeps any large society running without anyone noticing it's happening. I had no frame of reference for what she actually meant, and so my mind built the smallest, safest version of her words and moved on. That sounds heavy, I said. Do you like it? She looked at me for a long moment before answering, and something in her expression softened, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to see in a very long time. No one has asked me that before, she said quietly, whether I liked it. That seems like an oversight. It is not an oversight, she said. It is a fact of the role. Fear does not ask questions about likes and dislikes. Fear only asks for compliance. I didn't fully understand that either, but something in the way she said it made my chest ache a little. The particular ache of realizing someone has been lonely for a long time and has gotten used to it the way you get used to a low hum in a room, background noise you stop hearing until someone points it out. Well, I said, for what it's worth, I think you're a wonderful dancer, whatever the rest of your job involves. You have nothing to compare me to, she pointed out. I am the only being you have danced with tonight. That's true, I admitted. But I stand by the compliment on principle. She laughed again, softer this time, and something about that laugh, the third one, the one that seemed to come easier than the first two, made the whole room feel warmer than it had any right to feel on a space station orbiting a star I couldn't name. We danced through 2 more songs, and I told her about Earth, about rain that fell straight down instead of sideways like I'd heard it did on some worlds, about the ocean, about how humans had spent most of our short history arguing with each other over things that seemed enormous at the time and looked small from orbit. She listened the way people rarely listen, fully, without preparing her next sentence while I was still speaking, and in return, she told me small, true things about herself, carefully, like someone testing whether a bridge would hold her weight before she committed her full step to it. She told me she liked quiet mornings. She told me she had once tried to learn an instrument and failed entirely. She told me, with a kind of wonder in her voice, that she could not remember the last time she had danced with anyone who was not required to dance with her. I thought that last part was a joke. I laughed. She did not laugh with me, and something about the way her expression stayed still made a small, quiet alarm go off somewhere in the back of my mind, the first one all night, though I still didn't understand what it meant. When the song ended, she stepped back and inclined her head toward me, a small, formal gesture that felt different from everything else that had passed between us. Older, heavier, like a door closing gently on a room I hadn't realized I'd been standing inside. "Thank you, Callum Ashby," she said. "For the dance, and for the question no one else thought to ask." "Thank you for saying yes," I said. "I was fairly sure you'd say no." "So was everyone else in this room," she said, and there was something almost mischievous in her voice now, a lightness that hadn't been there when we'd started. She walked away before I could ask what she meant, disappearing into a side corridor, with 2 silent attendants falling into step behind her, and I stood there in the middle of the dance floor feeling pleasantly confused, the way you feel after a good conversation with a stranger on a train, wondering if you'll ever cross paths again, and knowing you probably won't. That confusion did not last long. A hand closed around my arm almost immediately, firm and urgent, and I turned to find one of the human delegation's cultural liaisons standing beside me, a woman named Priya Malhotra, who had spent the entire shuttle ride quizzing us on protocol, while the rest of us stared out the window. Her face had gone the particular shade of pale that happens right before someone either faints or shouts, and for a moment, I genuinely thought she might do both. "Do you have any idea," she said, her voice tight and low, "who that was?" "Iskariel," I said. "She told me her name. We danced. It was nice. Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" "She's not just Iskariel," Priya said, pulling me further from the crowd, closer to the wall of frozen smoke I'd been hiding against earlier. "She's the Night Regent." I blinked. "Is that a nickname?" "It sounds like a nickname." "It's a title," Priya said. "It's the highest judicial and executive authority in the entire coalition after the ruling council itself. She presides over disputes between member worlds. She decides which conflicts get resolved through negotiation and which ones get resolved through force. She has ended wars with a single ruling, Callum. She has ended careers, alliances, entire diplomatic missions with a single word. Nobody approaches her without invitation. Nobody. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I felt the blood drain slowly out of my face as the pieces started arranging themselves into a picture I very much did not want to look at. The wide circle around us on the dance floor, the silence when I'd first touched her hand, the sound of someone choking on their own tongue behind me, the tray of drinks hitting the floor. "I asked her to dance," I said, mostly to myself, the words feeling strange and heavy in my mouth. "You asked the Night Regent to dance," Priya said, without performing a single greeting protocol, "and she said yes." "She said yes," I repeated, still trying to make the sentence make sense. "She hasn't danced with anyone in 30 years, Priya said. "Not one person. Not at any function, any gala, any ceremony. There are entire diplomatic strategies built around the assumption that she won't, and you just walked up and asked her like she was standing alone at a wedding reception." "She was standing alone," I said weakly. "That's exactly what it looked like." Priya opened her mouth to respond, and then closed it again, some new thought moving across her face, and I watched her expression shift from horror into something more complicated, something almost thoughtful. "You really didn't know," she said slowly. "I really didn't know. You weren't making some kind of political statement. You weren't testing a theory about human exceptionalism. You just saw a woman standing alone and asked her to dance. That's genuinely all that happened, Priya. I promise you, my entire strategic plan tonight was to not spill anything on the ambassador. She stared at me for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, she started to laugh, a short, disbelieving laugh that she quickly covered with her hand, glancing around to see who might have noticed. Before she could say anything else, the crowd near the side corridor parted, and Iscariel returned, no longer trailed by her two silent attendants, but instead by a small cluster of older delegates from other worlds, beings with elaborate robes and expressions I couldn't read, all of them watching her with a kind of careful, practiced attention. She walked directly toward me, and the ballroom, which had slowly returned to its normal murmur of conversation and clinking glasses, fell silent again, faster this time, like everyone had been waiting for this second act and knew exactly when to stop talking. "Callum Ashby," she said, and her voice carried further than a normal speaking voice should, reaching every corner of the room without seeming to rise in volume at all. "I understand you have just learned who I am." "I have," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected, which surprised me almost as much as everything else that had happened that night. "I owe you an apology, I think. If I'd known, I would have at least attempted one of the 17 greeting phrases." "Would you have asked me to dance?" she asked. I thought about that question honestly, because it deserved an honest answer. "Probably not," I admitted. "I would have been too afraid." "That is precisely why I said yes," she said, and something in her tone made the whole room lean in a little closer, even the ones pretending not to listen. "For 30 years, every being in this coalition has approached me with fear first, and everything else second. Fear of my role, fear of my judgment, fear of what a single wrong word might cost them. No one has looked at me and simply seen a woman standing alone at a party. You did not know to be afraid, so you were not afraid. And so you saw something the rest of this room has forgotten I still am." She turned slightly, addressing the wider crowd now, and her voice took on a different quality, formal and resonant, the voice of someone accustomed to being heard and understood the first time. "Let it be known," she said, "that on this night, a human delegate approached the Night Regent without protocol, without fear, and without agenda, and was received with favor. Let it further be known that this coalition would do well to remember what fearlessness looks like when it is honest rather than reckless. There is a difference, and it is worth learning." As she turned back to me, and her expression softened again, the formal mask slipping just slightly to let something warmer show through. "You have my regard, Callum Ashby," she said, quieter now, meant for me more than for the room. "That is not a small thing, and I suspect you still do not fully understand how large a thing it is. I find that I do not mind your not understanding it. Perhaps that is part of why I find you interesting." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the only thing that felt honest. "For what it's worth," I said, "I'd dance with you again. Protocol or no protocol." Something flickered behind her eyes, that second dim light brightening for just a moment, and the smile that crossed her face this time was different from the others, less careful, less measured, something closer to genuinely pleased. "I imagine you will get the chance," she said. She inclined her head once more, a gesture I now understood carried far more weight than I'd realized the first time, and then she turned and walked back into the crowd, which parted for her the way it always had, though something in the way people watched her go seemed different now, softer somehow, like they were seeing her a little more clearly than they had an hour before. Priya turned to me, still slightly pale, shaking her head slowly. "Do you understand what just happened?" "Not even a little," I said honestly, "but I think it went well. You may have just changed how an entire coalition of species thinks about first contact protocol," she said, "based entirely on the fact that you don't read briefing packets properly." "I read part of it," I said. "The part about not spilling drinks on ambassadors. I feel like tonight proves I should have focused there." Priya laughed again, longer this time, and around us, the gala slowly returned to its normal rhythm, music rising back into the air, conversation filling the spaces where silence had been, and I stood there in the middle of it all, still holding a drink I hadn't tasted, still not entirely sure how the evening had gone the way it had. Later, walking back to the shuttle under a sky full of stars that still didn't have names I knew, I thought about the whole strange night, about the wide circle on the dance floor, and the silence, and the laugh she hadn't planned on making, and I decided that whatever else came of it, whatever it meant for trade agreements or coalition politics, or the careful, complicated business of two very different kinds of people learning how to stand in the same room without fear, I would remember one simple thing above all the rest. She was a really good dancer.